At my 40th birthday party, my husband stood up to give a toast. Instead of celebrating me, he thanked himself for carrying the dead weight all these years. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I smiled, set down my glass, and said, "Thank you for finally showing everyone who you really are." Then I walked out of my own party, and my old life, forever. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The ballroom at Riverside Manor was decorated exactly how I had envisioned it. Soft amber lighting cascaded from vintage chandeliers I had spent 3 weeks sourcing. White orchids, my favorite, adorned every table, their delicate petals catching the golden glow. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, the music sophisticated but not pretentious. The cake was a 3-tiered masterpiece from Delacroix Bakery, chocolate ganache with raspberry filling, designed to look like an Art Deco sculpture. I had planned every detail of this celebration. Not because I'm a perfectionist, though perhaps I am. But because this party wasn't really for me. It was for him. For us. For the image we projected to the 60 guests who filled this elegant space, colleagues from his architectural firm, clients who had become friends, neighbors from our gated community, family members who had traveled from 3 different states. I was turning 40. For decades of life, and I had spent the last 12 years of it being Mrs. Nathaniel Ashford. I wore an emerald green dress that Nathaniel had picked out for me 2 weeks earlier. He said it made me look appropriate but not attention-seeking. I had learned over the years that this was his way of saying I looked good enough to reflect well on him, but not so stunning that I might outshine him at an event that technically centered on me. My hair was styled in soft waves. My makeup was flawless but natural. I wore the diamond earrings his mother had given me on our wedding day, the ones that were beautiful but somehow always felt like they belonged to the Ashford family legacy rather than to me personally. I stood near the entrance greeting guests as they arrived, accepting their birthday wishes with practiced warmth. Nathaniel was across the room holding court with a cluster of senior partners from his firm, Henderson Architecture Group. He was animated, gesturing with his wine glass, commanding attention the way he always did in professional settings. I watched him and felt something. Not quite pride. Not quite resentment. Something in between that I had stopped trying to name years ago. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant," cooed Penelope Whitmore, one of the wives from Nathaniel's social circle. She air-kissed both my cheeks with practiced precision. "40 looks fabulous on you. You must share your secrets." I smiled and thanked her, even though the secret was simple: expensive skin care, regular exercise, and the kind of stress that ages you internally while you maintain an immaculate exterior. My sister, Jade, appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. She pressed it into my hand and leaned close. "You okay?" she whispered. Jade knew. She always knew. She had been watching me disappear into this marriage for over a decade, offering support without judgment, creating space for me to acknowledge truths I wasn't ready to face. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response so practiced it required no thought. Jade's eyes said she didn't believe me, but she nodded and squeezed my hand once before melting back into the crowd. Dinner was served at 8 p.m. The catering company I had hired, Lavender and Thyme, executed everything flawlessly. Herb-crusted salmon with lemon butter sauce. Roasted vegetables that looked like art on each plate. A mixed greens salad with candied walnuts and goat cheese. Everything was elegant, refined, exactly what Nathaniel's world expected. I barely tasted any of it. I was too busy monitoring the room, making sure guests were comfortable, that conversations were flowing, that no one felt excluded or bored. This was what I did. This was my expertise. Creating environments where people felt valued and important, managing the social infrastructure that made Nathaniel's professional success possible. Between the main course and dessert, Nathaniel stood up. He tapped his knife against his wine glass, and the sound cut through the ambient conversation like a bell. The room fell silent. 60 faces turned toward him with the kind of immediate attention that important men command effortlessly. My stomach tightened with something I couldn't name. Anticipation? Warning? Some instinct that understood before my conscious mind caught up that something was about to shift. Nathaniel smiled. He was handsome in that polished, symmetrical way that photographs well. His suit was custom-tailored, charcoal gray that complemented his dark hair. He looked successful. Confident. Like a man who had built something impressive and knew it. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. 40 years is a significant milestone, and I'm grateful we could all gather to celebrate. He paused. Smiled wider. The pause felt calculated, like he was building to something. "My wife, Lorelei." He turned toward me, gesturing with his wine glass. "She's been by my side for 12 years now. Through promotions, through challenging projects, through late nights and demanding clients." My heart lifted slightly. Maybe he was going to acknowledge me. Maybe in front of all these people who mattered in our social world, he was going to recognize partnership, contribution, the invisible work that held everything together. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. And honestly, Nathaniel continued, his smile taking on an edge I recognized but couldn't quite decode, "I have to thank myself for carrying the dead weight all these years." The words landed with physical force. Time did something strange. Each second stretched impossibly long while everything happened too fast to stop. Dead weight. He had just called me dead weight. In front of 60 people. At my own birthday party. I watched faces around the room react in stages. First confusion. Then uncertainty about whether this was meant to be funny. Then, as they looked at Nathaniel and saw he was still smiling, still holding his glass like he had just delivered clever humor, they decided it must be acceptable. The laughter started quietly. Nervous chuckles from people unsure if they were allowed to laugh at this. Then it grew louder as more people joined in, gaining confidence from each other's reactions. Nathaniel's business partner, Gerald Hampton, laughed the hardest. He slapped the table and wiped his eyes with his napkin. Around the ballroom, people were laughing with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some looked uncomfortable but were laughing anyway because not laughing would have been worse, would have created awkward tension and marked them as not understanding sophisticated humor. I sat completely still. My hands were folded in my lap. I could feel my face doing something, but I had no idea what expression I was wearing. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. Every eye in the room was on me now, waiting to see what I would do. Would I laugh along and prove I was a good sport who could take a joke? Would I crumble into tears and confirm I was as weak and sensitive as they probably suspected? Would I explode with anger and give them all a story to tell tomorrow about the hysterical wife who couldn't handle a little birthday roast? Something inside me that had been bending for 12 years, accommodating and adjusting and making itself smaller to fit the space Nathaniel allowed me, finally snapped. But it didn't snap into rage or tears or any of the reactions they expected. It snapped into absolute clarity. I reached for my wine glass. The movement was deliberate and slow. I wrapped my fingers around the crystal stem and lifted it until it was level with my eyes. 60 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort to anticipation of whatever scene I was about to create. I looked directly at Nathaniel across the table. His smile had frozen in place, uncertainty starting to creep into his expression as he realized something was happening that he hadn't scripted. My voice came out steady and clear. Not loud, but carrying easily across the silence that had settled over the ballroom. "Thank you for finally showing everyone who you really are." I took one sip of the wine. It was excellent, a 2015 Bordeaux that I had selected specifically for this evening. I wasn't about to waste it. I set the glass down with careful precision, the base touching the tablecloth with barely a sound. Then I picked up my clutch from beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and stood. The room was so quiet I could hear fabric rustling as people shifted in their seats. I smoothed my emerald dress, adjusted my clutch over my shoulder, and walked toward the exit. Not running. Not storming out with dramatic fury. Just walking with the kind of calm that comes from finally making a decision you should have made years ago. I didn't look back at Nathaniel. I didn't acknowledge Gerald or Penelope or any of the guests who had laughed at my expense. I simply walked through the ballroom, past the beautiful orchids I had arranged, past the string quartet still frozen mid-song, through the ornate lobby of Riverside Manor, and out the front entrance into the cool October air. Outside Riverside Manor, I stood under the elegant stone archway that framed the entrance, my hands trembling despite the steady calm I had projected just moments before. The valet attendants stood at attention near their booth, pretending not to notice the woman in the emerald dress who had just walked out of her own birthday party. My phone was already buzzing in my clutch. I pulled it out and saw Jade's name flashing on the screen. I answered. "Where are you?" Her voice was urgent but controlled. "Outside. Front entrance. Stay there. I'm coming." She appeared less than 2 minutes later, practically running through the lobby in her burgundy cocktail dress and heels. When she reached me, she didn't ask what happened or why I left. She just wrapped her arms around me and held on tight. "I heard what he said," she whispered against my hair. Everyone heard what he said. The trembling in my hands spread to my whole body then, adrenaline flooding my system in waves that made my knees weak. Jade held me steady until I could breathe normally again. "Take me to your place," I said finally. "I can't go home tonight." Jade's apartment was a modest 2-bedroom in the Belmont Heights neighborhood, a 20-minute drive from the manor. She had lived there for 5 years, ever since she started her career as a middle school art teacher. The space was filled with her personality, colorful paintings on the walls, plants on every available surface, mismatched furniture that somehow worked together perfectly. It was the opposite of the pristine, carefully curated home I shared with Nathaniel in Westridge Estates, where everything matched and nothing felt truly lived in. Jade made chamomile tea that I didn't drink. I sat on her worn velvet couch still wearing the emerald dress and diamond earrings, staring at the wall while my mind tried to process what had just happened. "Talk to me," Jade said gently, sitting cross-legged in the armchair across from me. So I talked. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about the 12 years that led to that moment. About how it started so gradually I didn't notice it happening until it had already happened. When Nathaniel and I married, I was 28 and working as a project coordinator for Meridian Events, a corporate event planning company. I was good at my job, excellent, actually. I understood how to manage complex logistics, how to read clients and anticipate their needs, how to create experiences that made people feel important and valued. Nathaniel was a junior architect at Henderson Architecture Group with ambitions that far exceeded his current position. He worked relentlessly, brought home blueprints and design proposals, talked endlessly about the buildings he was going to create, the reputation he was going to build. We were partners then. Or at least I believed we were. We talked about his projects and my events. We made decisions together. We split household responsibilities in ways that felt equitable and fair. But when Nathaniel landed the Grandview Medical Center project, his first major solo design, something shifted. The project required intense focus, late nights at the office, weekend site visits, constant client communication. Someone needed to manage everything else. Someone needed to handle the home, the bills, the social obligations, the 1,000 small details that kept our life running smoothly. I was making good money at Meridian, but Nathaniel's salary had just tripled with this new project. It made financial sense for me to scale back temporarily, to support him through this critical career phase. Temporarily became 6 months. 6 months became a year. A year became permanent so gradually I didn't notice it happening. I told myself I was making a strategic choice. Nathaniel's career had explosive potential. Mine could wait. We were building something together, and sometimes building together meant one person held the foundation while the other person climbed. But foundation holding requires acknowledgement. And acknowledgement disappeared so slowly I didn't realize it was gone until much later. I became the person who knew everything about Nathaniel's professional world without officially existing in it. I learned that Gerald Hampton, Nathaniel's business partner, was a man who made decisions based on personal rapport more than professional credentials. He had twin daughters who played competitive tennis, and if you asked about their tournaments with genuine interest, Gerald would talk for an hour and leave the conversation feeling positively disposed toward you. I made sure Nathaniel asked about those tennis matches. I made sure he remembered details from previous conversations so his interest seemed authentic rather than calculated. I learned that the Grandview Medical Center project administrator, Patricia Yang, was a woman who valued attention to aesthetic detail. When we hosted the Yang family for dinner at our home, I researched her background and discovered she had studied interior design before moving into healthcare administration. I filled our home with subtle design elements that sparked conversation: a vintage Murano glass vase, an Art Deco lamp, a carefully curated gallery wall. Patricia spent the evening asking about my design choices, and by the time dinner ended, she was telling Nathaniel how lucky he was to have a wife with such refined taste. That dinner translated into Patricia advocating for Nathaniel to lead the medical center's expansion project 2 years later. I transformed our home into a strategic asset without ever using that language, without ever demanding credit. The dinner parties I hosted weren't just social occasions. They were carefully orchestrated opportunities where Nathaniel's colleagues and clients relaxed, formed personal connections, let their professional guards down. I planned menus that impressed without seeming pretentious. I made sure conversations flowed naturally, that no one felt excluded or uncomfortable, that everyone left feeling like they had spent the evening somewhere special and that Nathaniel was someone worth knowing better. And late at night, after guests left and the house was quiet again, I sat with Nathaniel at our dining table and helped him with his real work. He would pull out his laptop and show me design proposals he was developing for potential clients. I would look at his presentations and point out where his pitch was too technical for non-architect audiences, where his visuals didn't support his narrative, where he needed to emphasize emotional impact over structural specifications. I had a gift for understanding how people would respond to his ideas, for seeing when he needed to simplify his approach or when he needed to lean into complexity to demonstrate expertise. He started asking for my input on everything. Every major pitch. Every client proposal. Every design competition submission. I remembered the night before his presentation for the Silver Lake Cultural Center, the $15 million project that would eventually make him the youngest partner in Henderson Architecture Group's history. It was 1 a.m. and he called me from his hotel room in Redmond City, completely panicked. The selection committee wasn't responding to his modernist approach. The board chair thought his design was too cold, too impersonal for a community cultural center. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. He sent me his presentation and I spent 4 hours rebuilding his narrative. I found the places where his architectural theory had overshadowed the human experience. I restructured his design story to emphasize community gathering, emotional connection, spaces that would make people feel welcomed rather than impressed. At 5 a.m., I sent him the revised version. He called me back 30 minutes later, his voice flooded with relief and gratitude. He told me I had saved the project, that he didn't know what he would do without me, that I was the reason any of his success was possible. I remember feeling warm with pride, believing absolutely that we were partners, that his success was our success, that the foundation I was building mattered even if my name never appeared on any architectural drawing or award nomination. I genuinely believed that. I believed it when I helped him prepare for presentations. I believed it when I hosted his clients and made them feel valued. I believed it when I managed every detail of our household so he could work 70-hour weeks without worrying about whether we had groceries or whether the mortgage was paid on time. I believed it when I gave up my career at Meridian Events because his career had more momentum and more financial potential. I believed it right up until the moment he stood at my 40th birthday party and called me dead weight in front of 60 people. Jesus Christ, Jade breathed when I finally stopped talking. It was nearly 2 a.m. We had been sitting in her living room for hours while I unspooled 12 years of invisible labor that Nathaniel had systematically erased from his narrative of success. I became nothing, I said, my voice hollow. I erased myself so completely that even he started to believe I contributed nothing of value. No. Jade's voice was sharp, cutting through my spiral. You didn't erase yourself. He erased you. Systematically. Deliberately. And tonight he made it public. She stood up and paced across her small living room, her burgundy dress swishing with each agitated step. You know what you were, she continued, turning to face me. You were his strategist, his editor, his client relations manager, his social architect. You were performing a full-time job without title or compensation. And he convinced you it was just being a supportive wife. The words hit something deep and true. Jade pulled out her phone and opened a new note. We're making a list right now. Every contribution. Every project you supported. Every client relationship you built. Every dinner party that led to business opportunities. Every presentation you revised. All of it. Why? I asked, exhausted. Because you're going to need evidence, Jade said firmly. Evidence that what you provided had value. Evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. 23 missed calls from Nathaniel. 17 text messages. I opened the messages and read through them chronologically. Nathaniel, 10:47 p.m., where did you go? You're embarrassing me by leaving like this. Nathaniel, 11:03 p.m., it was a joke, Lorelai. Everyone knew I was joking. You're overreacting. Nathaniel, 11:28 p.m., this is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk about this like adults. Nathaniel, 11:52 p.m., you made a scene for no reason. My partners are asking questions I shouldn't have to answer. Nathaniel, 12:19 a.m., fine. Stay wherever you are. But this childish behavior reflects badly on both of us. Nathaniel, 1:34 a.m., you're making me look incompetent in front of people who matter to my career. This is selfish and you know it. I read that last message 3 times, studying every word. My embarrassment didn't matter. His humiliation of me was just a joke I had taken too seriously. My absence was the problem. His public degradation of me was forgivable, but my refusal to accept it gracefully was selfish. The message told me everything I needed to know about how Nathaniel saw our marriage. I forwarded all the texts to my email, creating the first entries in what would become comprehensive documentation. Then I opened a new note and began making lists, just as Jade had suggested. Every client relationship I had facilitated. Every presentation I had edited. Every dinner party that led directly to business opportunities. Every piece of strategic advice I had offered that Nathaniel later presented as his own insight. Every sacrifice I had made to free him to work relentless hours without worrying about anything outside his career. I wrote until my hands cramped and the sky outside Jade's windows began lightening with approaching dawn. When Jade knocked softly on the guest room door around 7:30 a.m. with coffee, I had filled pages with detailed, specific, dated examples of contributions that Nathaniel had erased from his success story. This is evidence, Jade said, scrolling through the notes on my phone. This proves you weren't just a supportive spouse. You were actively building his career alongside him. I need a lawyer, I said. The decision had crystallized overnight. I need someone who can help me make sure this gets documented somewhere official. Somewhere Nathaniel can't just dismiss or erase. Jade nodded slowly. Do you know anyone? I thought about the various attorneys I had met over the years at Nathaniel's business functions. Most of them were corporate lawyers who would probably side with him automatically. But there was one person who stood out. A woman who had given me her card at a Henderson Architecture Group holiday party 3 years ago and told me to call if I ever needed help with anything. Diane Thornwell, I said, remembering the conversation. She specializes in family law. She told me once that she wished more women would advocate for themselves before situations became impossible. I found Diane's number in my contacts and called before I could second-guess the decision. The phone rang 3 times before a warm, professional voice answered. Diane Thornwell. This is Lorelai Ashford. We met at a Henderson Architecture Group event a few years ago. You gave me your card and told me to call if I ever needed help. There was a brief pause. I remember you, Lorelai, Diane said, her voice calm and unsurprised, as if she had been expecting this call for years. Tell me what happened. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a cafe called Harborview Commons, a place I chose deliberately for its complete lack of corporate polish. The tables were reclaimed wood scarred with years of use. The chairs were mismatched vintage pieces that looked salvaged from different estate sales. The lighting came from Edison bulbs hanging at various heights. The floor was concrete stained with coffee rings that had never quite cleaned up. No one from Nathaniel's world would ever set foot in a place like this, which made it perfect for what I needed to discuss. Diane arrived exactly at 2 p.m., carrying a weathered leather messenger bag that suggested years of courtroom experience. She was in her early 50s, her auburn hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing tailored slacks and a cream blouse that managed to look both professional and approachable. She ordered a double espresso from the counter and sat across from me with the kind of presence that made me feel simultaneously nervous and safe. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. "Start with last night." I recounted the birthday party at Riverside Manor. The toast. The dead weight comment. The laughter from 60 people who should have known better. My decision to walk out with whatever dignity I had left intact. Nathaniel's escalating text messages through the night that blamed me for embarrassing him rather than acknowledging what he had done. As I spoke, Diane took notes without interrupting, her expression neutral but her attention completely focused. When I finished, she set down her stylus and looked at me with directness I hadn't been prepared for. "What do you actually want from this situation, Lorelei?" The question caught me off guard. I had been operating purely on wounded dignity and instinct, moving from moment to moment without defining any clear objective beyond making sure Nathaniel understood he had hurt me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just know I can't go back to how things were." "That's a starting point, but it's not enough." Diane leaned forward slightly. "Do you want reconciliation? Do you want divorce? Do you want financial compensation for contributions you made to his career? Do you want him to suffer consequences? I need to understand what outcome would make you feel like justice was served." I sat with the question, letting myself actually think about what I wanted instead of just reacting to what had been done to me. The answer began forming as I spoke, crystallizing into something clear and specific. "I want recognition," I said slowly. "I want accounting for what I contributed. I want acknowledgement that I wasn't dead weight, but actively building the foundation that made his success possible. I want him to understand that what he took credit for was built partially on work I did without compensation or acknowledgement." Diane nodded and began typing notes on her tablet. "That's actionable. Recognition means documentation. Accounting means financial analysis. Acknowledgement means creating a record that can't be disputed or erased." She looked up at me. "We approach this strategically. First, we document your contributions with specificity and evidence. Second, we examine the financial structure of your marriage to understand what assets exist and how they've been controlled. Third, we consider what leverage you have beyond purely legal channels." That last point made me pause. "What do you mean beyond legal channels?" "Courts are slow and expensive and emotionally exhausting," Diane explained. "Sometimes the most powerful pressure comes not from judges, but from reputation and professional consequences. Your husband works in a field where relationships and image matter significantly. If we can demonstrate that his professional success was built partly on your unpaid strategic labor, that creates pressure points that a lawsuit alone might not achieve." The idea felt both strategic and slightly dangerous. But I had walked away from safety when I left that birthday party. There was no going back to comfortable denial. "What do I need to do?" Diane pulled up a document on her tablet and turned it toward me. "We build a case. You're going to become an investigator of your own marriage. I need evidence of every contribution you made to Nathaniel's career. Emails, text messages, calendar entries, witness statements if possible. I need documentation of client relationships you managed, presentations you edited, strategic advice you provided. I need a timeline of social events you hosted and what business outcomes resulted from them. Can you do that?" I thought about the years of emails still sitting in my account, the texts I had never deleted, the calendar I had meticulously maintained to coordinate Nathaniel's professional and personal life. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." "Good. We'll also need to examine your financial records completely. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, credit cards, retirement accounts, everything. I want to understand exactly how money has moved in your marriage and whether Nathaniel has been restructuring assets in ways that exclude you. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, I had a clear assignment list and a follow-up appointment scheduled for 2 weeks later. Diane walked me to the door and put a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Walking away took courage. Making sure you're treated fairly in the aftermath takes a different kind of courage. You have both. The next 2 weeks became an intensive investigation of my own life. I sat at Jade's dining table with my laptop and began methodically gathering evidence. I started with email, searching for key terms and names, building folders organized by category and date. I found the email thread with Patricia Yang from 3 years ago, following up after the dinner party where we had bonded over interior design. I had sent her information about a design symposium I thought she would enjoy. Patricia had responded thanking me for the thoughtful recommendation and mentioning she was looking forward to working more closely with Nathaniel on upcoming healthcare projects. That dinner party had directly resulted in Nathaniel being selected to design the medical center expansion, but his name was the only one that appeared on any documentation about how that relationship developed. I found dozens of emails where clients responded to event invitations I had sent, thanking me specifically for creating welcoming environments. Several mentioned they valued the personal connection they felt with Nathaniel because of the relationships I had facilitated. None of this appeared in any official record of Nathaniel's professional achievements. I found the presentation files Nathaniel had sent me over the years, always late at night, always with urgent requests for feedback. I had saved my edited versions with track changes showing exactly what I had revised. Strategic recommendations he had implemented without crediting where they originated. Narrative restructuring that made his technical designs accessible to non-architect audiences. Emotional language I had added to emphasize community impact over architectural theory. I created a detailed calendar reconstructing 5 years of social events I had hosted or organized. Next to each event, I noted which clients or colleagues attended and what business outcomes followed within the subsequent 6 months. The pattern was undeniable. My social infrastructure directly correlated with Nathaniel's professional advancement. The documentation took hours each day, but the work felt important in a way nothing had felt important in years. I was building proof that I had mattered, that my contributions were real and measurable and valuable. Each piece of evidence was another brick in a foundation that Nathaniel could not dismiss or explain away. The financial investigation was more disturbing. Working with Diane, I requested statements and documents from every financial institution where Nathaniel and I had accounts. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Nathaniel had been systematically moving money for at least 2 years. The joint checking account we both contributed to and drew from had been drained to less than $3,000, while a new account in only his name showed deposits totaling over $95,000. The investment portfolio we had supposedly built together over 12 years now had only his name on the ownership documents. When I checked the original paperwork from when we first opened those accounts, my name had been on everything. It had been removed sometime in the past 18 months. Our vacation cabin in Pinewood Valley, the place where we had celebrated anniversaries and hosted family holidays, had my name removed from the property deeds 7 months ago. I found the transfer documents buried in files Nathaniel kept in his home office. My signature had been forged on the quitclaim deed. I sat in Diane's office staring at bank statements and property records spread across her conference table, feeling physically sick. "This is financial abuse," Diane said bluntly. She didn't soften the term or offer euphemisms. "He's been preparing to exclude you financially for quite some time." This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated and methodical. The evidence transformed something fundamental in how I understood my marriage. Walking out of that birthday party, I had still held some small hope that Nathaniel's toast was a moment of poor judgment fueled by too much wine and professional stress. That perhaps confronting him with how deeply he had hurt me might lead to genuine apology and change. But the financial records showed intentional preparation to erase me, actions taken long before the birthday toast. This was not a mistake. This was the culmination of systematic exclusion. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Diane organized the documents into neat stacks, her movements precise and methodical. We can pursue this through family court, which will take months and be emotionally exhausting but will ultimately result in equitable division of assets and likely compensation for financial fraud. She paused, studying my face. Or we can create pressure through other channels that might achieve resolution faster and with less public exposure for you. What kind of pressure? Your husband works at a firm that values reputation and professional relationships. Henderson Architecture Group has built its brand on integrity and collaborative excellence. If we can demonstrate to his employer that his success was built partly on your unpaid strategic labor, particularly work involving client relationship development, that creates professional liability concerns for them. Diane pulled out another folder and opened it on the table. Firms don't like discovering that their partners have been taking credit for work performed by uncompensated family members. It raises ethical questions about credit attribution and creates potential exposure if clients discover the relationships they thought were authentic were actually strategically manufactured. I looked at the evidence we had gathered, thinking about the woman I had been 3 weeks ago who would have been horrified by the idea of involving Nathaniel's employer in our personal problems. But that woman had been willing to accept invisibility in exchange for peace. I was no longer that woman. I want him to understand consequences, I said. I want accountability, even if it has to be visible to others. Diane smiled, and I recognized the expression of someone who had just received permission to execute a strategy she had been carefully formulating since our first meeting. Then let's make sure he understands exactly what he lost when he called you dead weight. Diane spent the next 5 days crafting a letter with surgical precision. We met twice more at her office to review drafts, refining language until every sentence carried maximum impact without sacrificing professional tone. She understood instinctively that emotion would weaken our position, that what we needed was documentation presented with the same cool authority Nathaniel used in his own architectural proposals. The final version was 4 pages, printed on Diane's law firm letterhead. The first page outlined my contributions to Nathaniel's professional success with specific examples, dates, and measurable outcomes. It detailed the dinner party where Patricia Yang first expressed interest in expanding her working relationship with Nathaniel, noting that I had hosted the event, facilitated the design conversation, and created the comfortable environment where professional opportunities naturally emerged. It referenced the 1 a.m. consultation when Nathaniel panicked about the Silver Lake Cultural Center presentation, documenting how I had restructured his narrative to emphasize community connection over architectural theory, making the selection committee comfortable enough to award him the contract. It listed client relationships I had developed and maintained, including Gerald Hampton's family with email evidence showing how my attention to his daughter's tennis careers had translated into Gerald advocating for Nathaniel's partnership promotion. The second page presented financial evidence with clinical detachment. Bank statements showing systematic transfer of funds from joint accounts to accounts in Nathaniel's name alone. Property records documenting my removal from the Pinewood Valley cabin deed with what appeared to be forged signatures. Investment portfolios that had been restructured to exclude me from ownership despite being built with money from our marriage. Each piece of evidence was dated and cross-referenced, creating an undeniable pattern of financial manipulation. The third page addressed professional ethics. It noted that Henderson Architecture Group's marketing materials emphasized collaborative integrity and authentic client relationships. It questioned whether the firm's leadership was aware that a significant partner's client development success had been built partially on strategic labor performed by an unpaid spouse whose contributions were never acknowledged or compensated. The fourth page contained the proposal. I wanted formal recognition of my contributions through appropriate financial settlement that reflected both equitable division of marital assets and compensation for client relationship development work I had performed without acknowledgement or payment. The letter concluded with a deadline. Nathaniel had 10 days to respond substantively to the proposal, after which we would be compelled to make this information available through legal proceedings that would necessarily become part of public record. The letter was addressed to Nathaniel with copies to Gerald Hampton and 2 other senior partners at Henderson Architecture Group. It was neither emotional nor accusatory in tone. It read like a business proposal, which made it more powerful because it treated my contributions as professional work rather than wifely duty. We scheduled delivery for Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m., timing it to arrive during Henderson's weekly partner meeting. Diane arranged for certified mail to ensure official receipt and create documentation of delivery. Then we waited. Tuesday morning, Diane and I met at a different coffee shop, this one closer to her office. My phone sat on the table between us, volume turned up so we would hear it ring. Diane worked on other case files while I tried to drink tea that tasted like nothing because my mouth was too dry with anticipation to register flavor. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Nathaniel's name appeared on my screen and my hand shook slightly as I picked up the phone. Diane nodded encouragement. "Hello, Nathaniel. What the hell are you doing?" His voice was tight with barely controlled fury, each word clipped and hard. "You can't send letters to my firm about our private marriage. This is insane, Lorelei. You've completely lost perspective." I let the silence extend for 3 full seconds before responding. Diane had coached me on this, the power of not rushing to fill uncomfortable quiet. "You made our marriage public when you called me dead weight in front of 60 people at my birthday party," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "I'm simply providing context they didn't have at the time." "Context?" He was sputtering now, anger giving way to panic. "You're trying to destroy my career over a joke that everyone understood wasn't serious." Gerald is furious. The partners want explanations. "You're making me look incompetent." "That doesn't work for me," I said, using the phrase Diane had taught me. The words felt powerful in my mouth, simple and clear and requiring no justification. "You have 10 days to respond substantively to the settlement proposal. After that, we proceed through formal legal channels." "Lorelei, wait." His voice shifted, desperation creeping in beneath the anger. "We can talk about this. Just you and me, without lawyers and letters and all this drama you're creating. Come home and we'll work this out like adults." I almost laughed at that, as if I was the one who had behaved childishly by refusing to accept public humiliation with grace. "The proposal is clear," I said. "You have 10 days. I ended the call before he could continue arguing. My hand was shaking harder now, adrenaline flooding my system in waves that made my whole body tremble. But underneath the physical response was something solid and certain. I had done what needed to be done. Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, firmly. "Well done. That was perfect." That evening, I received an email that surprised me more than Nathaniel's phone call had. The sender was someone named Camille Reeves. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity mixed with caution. "Dear Lorelei, I hope it's appropriate that I'm reaching out. I work as an associate architect at Henderson, and I heard through firm channels about the letter you sent documenting your contributions to Nathaniel's career development. I don't know the details and I'm not asking for them. I just wanted to say that what you're doing, advocating for yourself, refusing to let your work be erased, gave me the first real courage I've felt in years. I've been in a similar position in my own relationship. My partner regularly minimizes my professional accomplishments and takes credit for design concepts I contribute during our evening conversations. I've told myself it doesn't matter because we're building a life together and partnership means not keeping score. But watching you refuse to accept that narrative made me realize I'd been lying to myself. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? Not to discuss your situation with Nathaniel, but to talk about how you found the strength to advocate for yourself when everything in your life was probably telling you to stay quiet. I understand if you'd rather not. Either way, thank you for showing me what dignity looks like. Camille. I read the email 3 times, feeling something shift in my understanding of what had happened at that birthday party. I had thought my walkout was purely personal, a private decision about my own marriage and my own dignity. But Camille's email revealed that other people had been watching, taking notes, finding courage in my refusal to accept erasure. I replied that evening, suggesting we meet the following week. Her response came back within minutes, grateful and relieved. Over the next several days, Nathaniel tried multiple approaches to regain control of the situation. The emails started arriving Wednesday morning, alternating wildly in tone between apologetic and accusatory. "Lorelei, I'm sorry the joke landed badly. I never meant to hurt you. You know how much I value everything you do for us. Let's talk about this without lawyers complicating things. Then 2 hours later, you're being completely irrational about this. Everyone at the party understood it was humor. You're the only one who took it seriously, which says more about your insecurity than anything I said. Then that evening, I can't believe you're trying to destroy my career over this. After everything I've provided for you, this is how you repay me? By making me look incompetent in front of my firm? I forwarded each email to Diane without responding to any of them. The pattern was clear. Nathaniel was cycling through different manipulation strategies, trying to find one that would make me back down. But none of them acknowledged what he had actually done or showed any understanding of why his toast had been so devastating. Saturday afternoon, Jade called me from her apartment where she was meal prepping for the week. Nathaniel just called me, she said without preamble. He wanted me to talk to you, to make you see reason. He said you're being vindictive and irrational and he just wants to have a conversation to work things out. What did you tell him? I told him he made his choices and now he has to live with the consequences. I told him that if he wanted you to stay silent about your contributions, he probably shouldn't have publicly announced that you had no contributions worth mentioning. Then I hung up on him. I smiled despite the tension coiling in my chest. Thank you. He's scared, Lorelei, Jade continued. I could hear it in his voice. He's not worried about losing you. He's worried about what happens to his reputation and partnership if people find out he's been taking credit for work you did. That truth settled over me with weight. Nathaniel's desperate attempts at reconciliation weren't about missing me or recognizing my value. They were about damage control. Sunday evening, there was a knock on Jade's apartment door. I was in the guest room reviewing financial documents when I heard Jade's voice through the door, firm and unwavering. She doesn't want to see you, Nathaniel. You need to leave. I just want to talk to her. 5 minutes. Jade, please. This is between me and my wife. Your wife, who you publicly humiliated and then systematically excluded from your finances. That wife? If you want to communicate with Lorelei, you can respond to the letter her attorney sent. Otherwise, you need to leave before I call building security. I heard Nathaniel's voice drop lower, pleading now rather than demanding. He talked for several minutes, his words muffled through the door but the desperation clear in his tone. Jade remained unmoved. Eventually, I heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway. Jade came to the guest room door and leaned against the frame. He looked terrible, she said. Exhausted, like he hasn't slept since the letter arrived. Good, I said, and meant it. The 10 days passed slowly. Diane and I prepared for the possibility that Nathaniel would refuse to negotiate, that we would need to file formal proceedings and pursue this through family court with all the public exposure that would entail. But Thursday afternoon of the second week, Diane's phone rang with a call from a number we had been anticipating. She answered on speaker so I could hear. This is Diane Thornwell. Miss Thornwell, this is Gerald Hampton from Henderson Architecture Group. I'd like to discuss the matter raised in your letter. Would you and Mrs. Ashford be available to meet tomorrow afternoon? Diane looked at me across her desk, her expression calm but alert. We're available tomorrow at 3 p.m., she said into the phone. Where would you like to meet? The Harrington Hotel has conference rooms we use occasionally for sensitive discussions, Gerald replied. His voice carried none of the jovial confidence I remembered from the birthday party. Second floor, Cypress Room. I'll have my assistant send you the details. We'll be there, Diane confirmed, then ended the call. She looked at me with an expression that mixed caution and something that might have been satisfaction. This is significant, she said. He's coming to us, not the other way around. That means the letter had exactly the impact we wanted. The question now is what he's willing to offer to contain the situation. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining different versions of the meeting, different things Gerald might say, different ways the conversation could unfold. By morning, I was exhausted but clear-headed, running on adrenaline and the determination that had carried me through the past 3 weeks. Diane picked me up at 2:30 p.m. I had dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that Jade had helped me choose, professional without being aggressive, authoritative without appearing confrontational. We drove to the Harrington Hotel in silence, both of us preparing mentally for what was coming. The Cypress Room was exactly what I expected. Neutral cream walls, a conference table that could seat 10 but was set for 4, windows overlooking the city that were positioned too high to provide any distracting view. The kind of space designed for difficult conversations that needed to happen away from regular office environments. Gerald Hampton arrived at exactly 3 p.m., but he wasn't alone. Nathaniel walked in behind him, and the sight of my husband made something tighten in my chest. He looked diminished somehow. He had lost weight, his suit hung slightly loose on his frame in a way that suggested the weight loss had happened rapidly. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of grooming could hide. His usual commanding presence, the confidence that had always preceded him into rooms, seemed absent. Gerald extended his hand first to Diane, then to me. "Miss Thornwell, Mrs. Ashford. Thank you for meeting with us." Nathaniel didn't offer his hand. He couldn't seem to meet my eyes. We sat across from each other at the conference table. Gerald folded his hands in front of him and took a breath before speaking. "I want to start by addressing what happened at your birthday celebration," Gerald said, looking directly at me. I was present. I laughed. That response was inappropriate and reflected poor judgment on my part. What Nathaniel said wasn't funny, and my reaction gave permission for others to treat the situation as acceptable humor when it was anything but. The apology sounded rehearsed, but sincere. Like he had thought carefully about what he needed to say. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. Gerald nodded and continued. "After receiving your letter, I spent considerable time reviewing the documentation you provided. I also made some discreet inquiries with key clients to better understand the full scope of the situation." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. "I had no idea you had been so instrumental in developing and maintaining several of Nathaniel's most important client relationships." "You weren't supposed to know," I said. That was the point. Something flickered across Gerald's face that might have been recognition or shame or both. "I spoke with Patricia Yang from Grandview Medical," he continued. "She mentioned the dinner party you hosted where she felt genuinely welcomed and valued. She said the conversation you had about interior design made her feel seen as more than just a project administrator. She also mentioned that the personal connection she felt with your family was a significant factor in her decision to advocate for Nathaniel to lead the expansion project." I remembered that dinner party. I had spent days researching Patricia's background, preparing conversation topics that would make her feel appreciated and understood. Nathaniel had taken full credit for the relationship deepening that followed. "I found similar feedback from other major clients," Gerald said. "Your name came up repeatedly as someone who made people feel valued on a personal level, which translated into professional trust and expanded business relationships. That's not spousal support, Mrs. Ashford. That's client development work that would command significant compensation if performed by someone we had hired for that purpose." Diane remained silent beside me, letting Gerald present his position without interruption. I could feel her attention absorbing every word, every gesture, every subtle shift in tone. "Henderson Architecture Group values integrity and collaborative ethics," Gerald said. "What happened at that birthday party falls short of the standards we expect from our partners. More significantly, your letter has raised questions about whether we have inadvertently created a culture that allows people to take credit for work they didn't do, whether that work comes from colleagues or from family members providing uncompensated labor." He pulled out a folder and opened it on the table between us. Inside were several documents that he turned so Diane and I could read them. "We would like to propose a resolution that addresses your concerns while maintaining appropriate discretion for all parties involved," Gerald said. "This includes you, Mrs. Ashford. We understand this is a deeply personal family matter that became unfortunately public, and we want to respect your privacy going forward." Diane leaned forward slightly, her professional attention fully engaged. "What specifically are you proposing?" Gerald walked us through the documents methodically. The first was a settlement agreement that outlined financial compensation in 2 distinct parts. The first part represented equitable division of marital assets that Nathaniel had attempted to restructure in his name alone, including restoration of my name to the Pinewood Valley property deed and restitution for the forged signature. The second part was labeled Client Development Consulting Compensation and represented payment for the relationship building work I had performed over the past 7 years, calculated at rates the firm would have paid an external consultant for equivalent services. The total amount made my breath catch. It was more than I had earned in my entire career at Meridian Events. The second document was a formal letter from Henderson Architecture Group on firm letterhead. It acknowledged my contributions to facilitating key client relationships and building the personal infrastructure that supported several major projects. It was carefully worded to avoid creating legal liability while still providing clear documentation that my work had professional value. The letter concluded by stating it could be used for my professional records should I choose to pursue consulting or business development work in the future. The third document outlined changes the firm would implement: mandatory training for all partners and senior associates on professional conduct, appropriate attribution of contributions, and ethical boundaries. The training would include case studies, and Gerald acknowledged directly that Nathaniel's situation would be one of those case studies, though with identifying details removed. "There's one more component," Gerald said, his voice dropping slightly. "This one involves Nathaniel's position at the firm." He explained that Nathaniel's behavior had created liability concerns for Henderson Architecture Group. Beyond the personal harm to me, there were professional implications. Client relationships built partially through my uncompensated labor raised questions about credit attribution and ethical conduct. The public nature of Nathaniel's comments at a firm-adjacent celebration created reputational risk. "We are not terminating Nathaniel's partnership," Gerald said carefully. "But there will be significant restructuring of his role. He will step back from client-facing responsibilities for 6 months while completing mandatory executive coaching focused on professional conduct and interpersonal ethics. His compensation will be adjusted to reflect reduced responsibilities during this period. And there is clear understanding that any future incidents of this nature will result in immediate termination of partnership." Gerald looked at Nathaniel, who sat perfectly still, his face pale. "Nathaniel has been informed of these terms and has signed the acknowledgement this morning." Diane looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. Was this enough? Did this represent the recognition and accountability I had asked for? I thought about the woman I had been at that birthday party, sitting in her carefully chosen emerald dress while her husband reduced 12 years of partnership to a punchline about dead weight. I thought about the documentation I had spent weeks gathering, proof that I had mattered even when everyone acted like I didn't. I thought about Camille's email and the realization that my refusal to accept erasure had given other people courage to examine their own situations. "I want one addition," I said, speaking directly to Gerald for the first time since he had outlined the proposal. "The training you're implementing for partners and associates. I want to be involved in developing it. Not publicly, not in a way that identifies me personally, but I want input into what gets taught about recognizing invisible labor and giving appropriate credit." Gerald looked surprised, but nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. Your perspective would actually be invaluable in making the training more effective and authentic." Diane pulled out her own folder and made notes on the documents Gerald had provided. "We'll need to review everything in detail before my client signs anything. But preliminarily, this addresses the major concerns we outlined in our letter." "How long do you need for review?" Gerald asked. 48 hours, Diane replied. "We'll have a response to you by Monday morning." Gerald stood, and we followed. He extended his hand again, first to Diane, then to me. When he shook my hand, he held it a moment longer than strictly necessary. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Ashford, I think what you did took considerable courage. Walking out of that party, sending that letter, refusing to let this be dismissed as just a misunderstanding. Not many people would have the strength to advocate for themselves that clearly." Nathaniel finally looked at me then. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Lorelei," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't see what you were doing. I thought you were just managing the house. I didn't realize it was work. Real work." The apology hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to ask how he could have been so blind. How 12 years of partnership could have left him so completely unaware of what I contributed. But I realized the question didn't matter anymore. His ignorance was not my problem to solve. Now you know, I said simply. After they left, Diane and I sat back down at the conference table. She pulled out her tablet and began making detailed notes while everything was still fresh. That went significantly better than I expected, she said without looking up from her typing. They're taking this seriously because they're genuinely worried about the legal and reputational implications. Is the settlement fair? I asked. She looked up at me then, her expression serious. It's more than fair. It's validation. They're acknowledging your work had monetary value, not just emotional significance. That matters, Lorelei. That's what you asked for, recognition and accounting. This is both. We left the hotel and sat in Diane's car in the parking garage for a few minutes before driving back to her office. I stared out the window at concrete pillars and fluorescent lights and felt something fundamental shifting inside me. For 12 years, I had been invisible. My contributions erased as quickly as I made them. And now a firm full of powerful people had put their acknowledgement in writing, had attached monetary value to work they had benefited from without recognizing, had implemented consequences for the person who had treated my labor as worthless. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo the years of erasure or the humiliation of that toast. But it was something real and documented and permanent. What are you thinking? Diane asked quietly. I'm thinking about the woman I was 4 weeks ago, I said. The one who would have been terrified to send that letter because it might make Nathaniel angry or damage his career. I don't recognize her anymore. Good, Diane said, starting the car. She deserved better than what she was accepting. Diane spent the weekend reviewing every clause of the settlement agreement. She called me Sunday evening with minor revisions she wanted to request, technical language adjustments that would strengthen my position without fundamentally changing the terms. By Monday morning, she had sent our response to Gerald confirming we would accept the settlement with the specified modifications. The final signing was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon at Diane's office. Nathaniel would need to be present to sign the marital asset division portions of the agreement, but Diane suggested we keep the meeting brief and focused purely on documentation. When Wednesday arrived, I felt surprisingly calm. Nathaniel came alone this time. He signed each document with movements that looked mechanical, his signature less fluid than usual. When he finished, he looked at me one more time. I really didn't know, he said quietly. All those years. I thought I was doing it alone. That's because I made sure you could think that, I said. I made my contributions invisible because I thought that's what support meant. I was wrong. Diane walked Nathaniel to the door. I heard them speaking briefly in the reception area, her voice professional and firm as she outlined next steps for asset transfers and finalization paperwork. Then the door closed and he was gone. Diane returned to the conference room and sat down across from me. How are you feeling? Free, I said. The word surprised me with its accuracy. Like I just set down something impossibly heavy that I'd been carrying so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. 3 days later, I met Camille for coffee at Harborview Commons. She was in her early 30s with sharp intelligence in her eyes and an energy that suggested someone still fighting rather than someone who had already surrendered. We talked for 3 hours. I found myself sharing not just what had happened, but what I had learned about documentation and boundaries and recognizing your own worth before someone else's valuation destroys it. I gave her Diane's contact information and told her about the process of building evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. By the end of the conversation, Camille had made lists on her phone of contributions she had made to her partner's architectural practice, financial accounts she needed to examine, conversations she needed to document. She looked different when she left, like something had shifted in how she carried herself. Thank you, she said before walking back to her car. For showing me what it looks like to refuse erasure. 6 months later, I stood in front of the floor-length mirror in my new apartment, a light-filled 2-bedroom in the Riverside district with exposed brick and tall windows that overlooked a tree-lined street. The apartment had slowly filled with intentional choices. Furniture I had selected because I loved it, not because it matched some predetermined aesthetic. Artwork from local galleries that spoke to me personally. Books arranged on shelves I had assembled myself one Saturday afternoon while Jade provided commentary and wine. On my desk sat business cards for my new consulting practice, Ashford Strategic Relations. I had kept my married name not because I wanted to maintain connection to Nathaniel, but because I had earned it through 12 years of work that finally had recognition. The consulting practice focused on helping professionals develop authentic client relationship skills and recognize invisible contributions in their organizations. My first clients had come through unexpected channels, several from Henderson Architecture Group, referred by Gerald himself after the training sessions I had helped develop proved more valuable than anyone anticipated. I understood relationship dynamics in ways that went beyond surface-level networking. I could identify which connections had genuine potential, which partnerships were transactional, which collaborations could become transformative. I knew how to build authentic relationships that served business objectives without feeling manipulative. The work satisfied me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The recognition was explicit. The compensation was fair. The credit belonged unambiguously to me. My phone buzzed with a text from someone named Rachel Drummond. She had attended a workshop I facilitated last month on recognizing invisible labor in professional partnerships. She wanted to know if I offered individual coaching for people preparing to advocate for themselves in difficult situations. I smiled and replied that I did, then added her to my calendar for next week. That evening, I had dinner at Jade's apartment. She had made her signature mushroom risotto, and we ate while sitting on her balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "You speak differently now," Jade observed, setting down her wine glass. "You take up space without apologizing for it. You state opinions without qualifying them with a maybe, or, I think, or, does that make sense? You just say what you mean." I thought about that, recognizing the truth in her observation. Somewhere in the process of fighting for recognition, I had stopped seeking permission to exist fully. "You've also stopped checking your phone anxiously," Jade continued. "When we're together now, you're actually present. Before, part of you was always elsewhere, anticipating needs or managing crises only you could see." She was right. The hypervigilance that had defined my marriage had evaporated so completely I hadn't even registered its absence. Jade raised her wine glass. "To the woman you're becoming. She's pretty extraordinary." I raised my glass to meet hers, feeling emotion tighten my throat. "To family who sees you even when you're disappearing." A month later, I received an invitation to speak at the Regional Women's Professional Summit, a conference that drew over 500 attendees annually. They had heard about my workshops and wanted to know if I would deliver a keynote address on navigating partnership dynamics and maintaining identity within collaborative relationships. I accepted before allowing fear to convince me otherwise. The morning of the keynote, I stood backstage listening to my introduction. The conference organizer listed credentials that still sounded foreign to my ears: founder of Ashford Strategic Relations, specialist in client relationship development and invisible labor recognition, consultant to firms across 3 industries. But these words described me now. This was who I had become. I walked onto that stage and the lights were bright enough that I could only see the first few rows clearly. 500 faces looking up at me with expectation and attention. I took a breath and began speaking. I told them about the birthday party. About the dead weight comment. About the decision to walk away with whatever dignity I had left. I explained what I learned about boundaries and documentation and the simple assertion that I would not participate in my own erasure anymore. I talked about discovering that being supportive never required being invisible, that partnership meant mutual recognition rather than one person's sacrifice enabling another person's glory. The applause that followed was sustained and powerful, carrying weight that made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When women began lining up afterward to speak with me, I understood something fundamental. My choice to walk away from that birthday party had created ripple effects I couldn't have predicted. Other people were watching. They were taking notes about what dignity looked like. They were finding courage to examine their own situations and advocate for themselves. A woman in her 50s told me she had been supporting her husband's medical practice for 25 years while he introduced her at events as, "just my wife." She was going to start documenting her contributions tomorrow. A younger woman explained she had been about to accept a business partnership with someone who regularly dismissed her creative input. After hearing my talk, she realized she needed to establish clear attribution agreements before making that commitment. An executive in her 40s said she had been minimizing her team's contributions in exactly the ways I described. She was going to change how she acknowledged the work that made her own success possible. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk reviewing the calendar on my laptop. It was full of consulting appointments, workshop bookings, speaking invitations, work I had chosen, compensation I had negotiated, recognition I had earned on my own terms. On the wall across from my desk hung a framed photograph from the conference, me mid-speech, gesturing to emphasize some point, with hundreds of attentive faces visible in the audience. Under the photo, I had written a single line in clean black ink, walked away. Built better. I thought about the woman I had been at that birthday party, wearing her emerald dress and practicing her smile, waiting to see if she would crumble or explode under the weight of public humiliation. I wished I could tell her what I knew now. That walking away was just the beginning. That dignity wasn't about performing grace under pressure, but about refusing to accept pressure designed to make you small. That the last insult had been his, but every achievement after would be entirely hers. My phone buzzed with a text from Camille. She had just told her partner she was starting her own architectural firm and would no longer be providing unpaid design consultation for his projects. She included 3 exclamation points and a note that she had set up an appointment with Diane for next week. I smiled and replied with encouragement, then returned to the proposal on my laptop. I had a new workshop to develop, this one focused on recognizing and compensating invisible labor in creative partnerships. The irony of building a career on expertise gained from 12 years of unpaid work wasn't lost on me. But irony was just another word for lessons learned the hard way, transformed into wisdom that could help others avoid the same pain. I was building something no one could take credit for because my name was on every contract, every invoice, every testimonial from grateful clients who finally understood how to value contributions they had been taking for granted. The foundation was mine. The structure was mine. The success, whatever form it ultimately took, would be mine alone. And that knowledge was worth more than any toast, any apology, any validation Nathaniel could have offered me at that birthday party. I had walked away. And I had built something better. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.